YouTube has made it crystal clear that they don't welcome content creators like myself and others on their platform. So I don't think my backup channel is going to be around for much longer. They already terminated my 500,000 subscriber channel with no warning, and they're taking down a lot of other channels for no reason. Don't get me wrong, no matter what, I'll keep posting videos till they kick me off again, but the writing is on the wall. Please take a minute to head over to bitchute.com/highimpactflicks and subscribe to my channel over there. Those guys hate censorship and go out of their way to preserve free speech. I'll leave a link in the description for that and for Patreon if you think my content is worth supporting. Now, I've been asked to review the infographics show video entitled, "What Would Happen If People Stopped Paying Taxes?" And before I start, I want to say that the objective of this video is not to tear down this channel. These guys appear to me to put a lot of hard work and thought into their content. The goal here is to line comments and assertions up with the facts and let the chips fall where they may. With around 2.2 million subscribers, these guys have a responsibility to put out factual information and can do a lot of damage if their message warps perceptions and maligns truth. On the other hand, they could do a lot of good if they give people true clarity on the actual issue. So what would happen if people stopped paying taxes? First, people don't pay taxes. That'd be like saying that the convenience store paid the thug who just pulled out a gun on the attendant and threatened violence if she didn't hand over the contents of the cash drawer. Paying somebody implies that there was a voluntary transaction. With the issue of taxes, nobody is paying anything. If they declare tomorrow that they're going to do away with taxes, how many people do you know who would voluntarily hand the government 30% of their hard-earned income? I don't know one. Tax money is stolen with the ever-present, universally understood threat that if you don't let the government rob you, you will suffer the wrath of the state. If you stop handing over your loot, agents with guns show up at your door and make an example out of you so that the other tax cattle don't get the same crazy idea.
A question that can often be heard coming out of the mouths of frustrated taxpayers is, what has the government ever done for me? Well, let's take a look. Public roads, free schools, a police force, libraries, museums, energy and water supplies, legal representation, the list goes on and on.
Let's clarify exactly what government is. Even George Washington said that government is not eloquence, it is not reason, it is force. Government is basically the false faith-based belief that a certain group or class of people who act as rulers has the moral right to use monopolized force and violence to arbitrarily command other people to submit to their edicts, which they call laws. And the rest of the people? Well, under the fairy tale concept called government, they have the moral obligation to obey said rulers. If we don't obey these rulers, who are mere men, mind you, well, we are punished, even though we have neither harmed nor threatened to harm anyone. We've been fed this lie since the day we were born, so most of us actually believe there is such a thing as government or authority or legitimate rulers and legitimate subjects when there isn't. One question demolishes the entire government illusion, and that is this. Does anyone have a legitimately higher claim over your life or property than you? We all know the answer. It's no. A companion question would be this. Is it ever right to initiate unjust force or violence on an individual who has not harmed or wronged another person? The answer is no. How about this question? Is it ever right to take somebody's stuff without getting their permission? The answer again is no. Let's reverse roles with this question. If we did to government agents what government agents did to us, we would be arrested and thrown into prison. And the insanity of the concept of government is encapsulated in this absolutely, utterly insane statement. Statism or government is the brilliant idea that we give a small group of people the right to kidnap, steal from, and kill us so that we can be protected from people who kidnap, steal from, and kill us. That makes a lot of sense. These simple considerations causes the imagined psychological construct of government to completely implode. Why? Because if you believe there exists some godlike creature called government, then you believe that someone on this planet does have a legitimately higher claim over your life and property than you. Further, if you believe government exists, then you have to say that you believe that it is right for someone to initiate unjust force or violence on an individual who has not harmed or wronged another person. And we all know that neither of these ideas are factual, logical, or consistent with the spirit of do to others what you would have done to you. Therefore, the concept of government is illegitimate, and those who put this belief into action are clearly doing that which is immoral. Period. As Frederick Bastiat once said, the state is that great fiction by which everyone seeks to live at the expense of someone else. So the makers of this video start with a faulty premise, and that is that there's such a thing as government and the people pay this government something called taxes. Next, these listed items are supposedly things that government does for you and provides for you. This also is untrue. Agents in the cultic, faith-based false religion called government are merely human beings. They are the ones who enforce the laws of politicians, who give them the orders to coercively plunder the wealth of others, making all these goods and services possible. As the saying goes, agents of government cannot give anything that they haven't first stolen from others. So the real providers of these listed items are actually the people who are being plundered by the ruling class. So let's move on.
But what about the things we don't want crazy politicians spending our cash on? Such as an obscene amount of military armament, empire building, gross clandestine experimentations, inflated salaries for the political elite, ginormous expense accounts for said politicians, and social and privacy manipulation.
These are all great examples of why we should absolutely and vehemently reject the religion called government. And this just scratches the surface. What about wars, a dishonest money system, and the removal of individual rights? What about declaring war on people and calling it a drug war? What about mind control operations like MK Ultra and continual surveillance? These are all great reasons to reject the concept called government and declare insane anybody who would even suggest that government is a good idea.
What would happen if a country's people decided to stop paying taxes? Anarchy? Utopia? None of the above?
We'll find out later that by suggesting anarchy on one side and utopia on the other, the narrator views anarchy in the way most people are taught. And that way is wrong. They try to squeeze the idea of chaos and mayhem into the term anarchy when these definitions absolutely do not fit. The pure etymology of the word dictates that the word itself simply means without rulers or without masters. The desire to have no rulers lording over you does not imply chaos or mayhem or a lack of utopia. It just means that you want to be free to take responsibility for your own actions without having to forcibly follow the dictates of another person.
The big question is, if everyone refused to pay taxes, would there be a trickle-down effect, and would that eventually become the law of the land?
Again, it's not about refusing to pay taxes, it's about refusing to let yourself and those you love be robbed. If everyone stopped letting these tax robberies take place, the immediate benefit to society would be positive and far-reaching. But the catalyst for such a scenario would necessitate a miraculous great awakening where the plundered class saw through the crafty schemes of the ruling class. Prosperity would be instantly realized as people would now keep the 30% of the earnings they were accustomed to having stolen from them The economy would be massively stimulated. The domestic terrorist organization known as the IRS would dry up and blow away. The international banking cartel would be in panic mode because everyone would no doubt see the fiat currency Ponzi scheme for the racket it is and demand a competing sound money system. The politicians would be cut off from their free gravy train, and the military-industrial complex, along with the Pentagon mothership, would not be able to grapple with or overcome the civil disobedience of 300 million awakened souls who are sick and tired of being plundered, many of whom, mind you, are well armed.
Hold on. Would there even be laws?
Remember, a man-made law is nothing more than the opinion of a political parasite backed by the threat of force. The ironic thing about paying taxes, more accurately being robbed, is that your money goes to fund men with guns who come and fine you or cage you for disobeying their master's commands. Because people equate laws with morality, the idea of no laws might freak people out. But the truth is that we don't need politicians to write down on fancy pieces of paper what's right and what's wrong. The golden rule pretty much sums all that up. Do to others what you would want others to do to you.
With no taxes and no politicians and no police force and no courts and no judges, who would uphold these laws?
People could easily and happily fund competing security forces and road construction companies. They'd also pay DROs or dispute resolution organizations that would be reputation-based in a competitive free market. These DROs would be incentivized to provide the best, most fair service at the best price, knowing that a truly free market would always produce a company that could resolve issues more efficiently and effectively. And this is just one example of how disputes could be resolved and crime and civil matters could be dealt with.
Would it even be possible in a modern nation to reach a point where the majority of citizens simply decided to live without taxation and government? Would such a movement be evolution or devolution? Tranquility or chaos? How would things shape out? To answer the question, we have to tackle the issue of tax paying like we would any other issue that the government has to respond to. Take same-sex marriage. A motion that is popular enough to gain enough support of the people would radiate massive warning signs to the current status quo.
Same-sex marriage or any relationship between two consenting adults is no one else's business, including agents in the religion known as government. So it doesn't matter what the majority of people think about this, it's none of their business. If no one's being harmed or defrauded, there's no legitimate reason for a third party to get involved. Think about what he's saying here. Since government is the idea that there must be a ruling class which has a monopoly on force, he's saying that a violent ruling class has to respond to the will of the people. And this is nonsense. Besides, what if 49% of the people want something, but 51% don't? How is it legitimate to give the 51% what they want and tell the 49% to go to hell? And who has the legitimate authority to make such a decision?
The government ultimately has to respond to the will of the people. And with same-sex marriage, it was a general consensus, a majority opinion, that civil partnerships between same-sex couples were not a bad thing despite what some hardcore religious folks believed.
Again, who cares what anybody believes about something that's none of their business?
The government has to react in a way to sway the people against a motion or support it. With taxes, the government would have to listen to the will of the people and respond accordingly, despite the fact that without taxes, the government would no longer be able to exist.
Check out this cartoon. The woman says, "Shall we support the motion for same-sex marriage?" And the guy responds, "We have to. That's what the crowd wants." That's exactly what democracy is. By the way, America was set up as a representative constitutional republic, not a democracy. A democracy is a mob rule scenario where the majority gets what it wants, or at least they think they do, and the minority is given the middle finger.
So it's a prickly issue, but if anyone can handle a prickly issue, it's a politician.
Now this may have been tongue-in-cheek since earlier he called them crazy politicians, but politicians don't really handle prickly issues. They actually create them. That's part of what keeps them in office.
tax-resistant citizens would probably be bought off with compromises in some fashion. Groups would be targeted and their needs listened to. Tax breaks would be introduced to soften the blow for the most militant. If the movement stood its ground and reached a majority, the stakes and concessions from the government to the people would become more attractive to those rogue taxpayers. However, if the movement stood firm, then at some point, the government would have to play dirty before surrendering. Key members of the tax resistance movement would have their bank accounts frozen and their assets seized. They may well be taken into custody on terrorism charges. The president or prime minister would go on national TV pleading with his or her people. Bundles of cash would be printed and the price of gold would soar.
In other words, those who imagine themselves to have power over others would try desperately not to lose their power through the loss of tax money, and they would resort to doing what they do best, threatening to keep everybody in line through the use of unjust force. Which is one of the main reasons we don't need the bogus idea of government in the first place. It's predicated on the gross immorality of theft, extortion, violence, kidnapping, and murder. All so that the ruling class can stay in power and the peasant class can stay subjugated.
But all this would be most unusual, and really it isn't likely to happen. In the United States, for example, it's unlikely to happen as people know that taxes are required for schools and running water, roads, and other basic human needs.
Basically, what he just propagated as a foregone conclusion is that we couldn't have schools, running water, roads, and other basic human needs unless a certain class of people is always threatening to harm the peasants if they don't let the rulers continue to let them steal the product of their laboring energies. In essence, what he's saying is, we all know that if you want these things, you have to continue consenting to the gross immorality of a bunch of narcissistic psychopaths. It's utter nonsense.
With gun ownership sky high, law and order would become a real concern. A no taxes vote is like a vote for anarchy, and a civilized society has evolved to move away from anarchy, so the movement reaching this point is extremely unlikely.
Anarchy. It's promoted as such a scary word, conjuring up thoughts of masked hoodlums throwing Molotov cocktails, burning cars, broken windows, and blood flowing in the streets. But true anarchy is the idea that we don't need rulers to govern or control the affairs of our lives. In line with voluntarism, the anarchist seeks peaceful interaction based on mutual cooperation, not coercion, not force, and not violence. Anarchy is not the scary word, government is. So when he says a civilized society has evolved to move away from anarchy, he's basically saying a civilized society has evolved to move away from peaceful interaction and has opted instead to move toward the monopolized, immoral, brute force of the state. You know, because we're civilized now.
The young and the old would be most affected. With no pensions and no public schools, it would fall on society itself to take care of the elderly and educate the young.
Which all worked perfectly fine before the inception of the unconstitutional income tax grabbing 16th Amendment. A society with a ruling class at the helm becomes an entitled, corrupted, non-reputation based, irresponsible society that looks to others to teach their kids and take care of their aging family members. An anarchist society takes care of its own, expecting no handout from others, and definitely does not want a third party initiating force on and stealing from others so that their own needs could be met.
Public broadcasting would totally disappear, giving rise to agenda-driven media. Fake news services would flourish even more than they do today.
I had to laugh at this. He speaks like government-controlled broadcasting quenches the fires of agenda-driven media and fake news services. As if we don't currently have CIA-operated media conglomerates churning out wild amounts of propaganda and fake news stories 24 hours a day. You can see clearly that this narrator is completely steeped in a statist mindset.
There would be no foreign aid, so international relations would suffer.
If our international relations would suffer because we didn't give them boatloads of money you worked for, then we didn't have a good international relationship in the first place. It's like that uncle that always comes over, eats your food, makes a mess, drives your car, and expects you to always take care of him. When you cut off his free ride, his free lunch, and his free place to stay, you never see him again. Who needs that kind of relationship? I'll leave the link to the infographics video so you can see it in its entirety. The bottom line is that those who look through the lenses crafted by a lifetime of continuous indoctrination, telling us at every turn that government is good and you're a bad person if you resist it, cannot see clearly to recognize that the very thing they hail as beneficial to society is the very thing that is destroying all of us. And frankly, you don't need to look any further than the 250 million people who have died at the hands of their own beloved government in the last century alone to see that that outlook needs to be abandoned before history repeats itself again. Guys, don't forget to take a second to go to the highimpactflix.com website and subscribe if you want to see more of my content. One way or another, we're going to fight censorship. Hopefully, the people at YouTube will get their heads out of their asses long enough to realize that thinking people on their platform aren't going to tolerate their tyrannical tactics for much longer. But I wouldn't hold my breath. Guys, if you like what we're doing here on this demonetized, censored channel and you want to support the effort, the Patreon, PayPal, and Bitcoin links are below. If you want to support the channel by grabbing a shirt or two, check out the new in-your-face designs like Black Rifles Matter, Escape from California, Taxation is Legalized Theft, and Sheepvolution. I'm adding new designs every week, and I do take design requests, so check back often. Thank you guys for subscribing, watching, sharing, and especially for all your kick-ass, thoughtful comments. I'll see you guys in the next heavily censored, demonetized video.
Take a ride on the wild side.